very sad news to begin the day. The coroner in the case of Gabby Petito confirmed that the remains found at a campground in Wyoming are in fact her. The FBI announced the manner of death was a homicide, but no word yet on the cause of death. Meantime, the search for Gabby's fiance, Brian Laundrie, continues. The FBI is asking for the public's help in locating him. Brian has been missing for more than a week now, and I'm just reading our comments from our viewers. Everyone wants to know, where is Brian? But I do just want to preface, sometimes, I've covered a lot of these cases for HLN and CNN. Sometimes we forget the people involved, right? Because we're so stuck on where is Brian or what's happening here. We have to remember that, humanity here. A person has died and that her family is absolutely suffering. I'm sure Brian's family is suffering too for completely different reasons. What do you think? Where is Brian?
I do not know. I think that, people are speculating, is he dead? Is he alive? I think in a lot of these situations, as you mentioned, you've covered a lot of them. It wouldn't be surprising to me either way, especially because you hear of, people who have taken the lives of people who are very close to them. And there is this seemingly, I'll say narcissism, which seems like far too little of a word. But I don't know, Sam. I have no idea.
All right, so for more on this, we are joined by criminal defense attorney and the principal of Joey Jackson Law. Joey, it is so good to see you despite these horrific circumstances. Thank you for joining DBL. So where do we go from here?
First of all, good to be with each and every one of you. Sad case indeed. That's a loaded question, Sam, for a number of reasons, but I'll tell you where I think we should go. Number one, right, we certainly need to find out where Mr. Laundrie is. That's significant. Why? Because he needs to be brought to justice. What does that mean? Everyone's innocent until proven guilty, but something seems amiss here. So the first step is to find him. What's step number two? Step number two is to proceed as the investigators are proceeding with respect to that investigation. Process one in that investigation is to do that autopsy and determine the cause of death. Why is that relevant? Because that will allow investigators and police, Sam, to make a determination as to how she died, what specifically occurred. Step number three, then, of course, is you're going to not only look at the body, I know it's graphic, but you're going to look at the surrounding crime scene and where the body was found. Now, is it possible that she could have been brought there at some later time? Is it possible that the crime was not committed there? I say crime because it's been ruled a homicide. That means it's not natural causes, so I'm confident in saying a crime was committed, but they'll scour that scene indeed for any forensic analysis that would bring them to that approach of who did it. Then after that, they're going to be speaking to any eyewitnesses, not only as to the specific instances of the criminal act itself, but filling in the gaps. Did you see them at an earlier time? What was the interaction? What were they doing? How were they doing it? Summing this up, you're also going to look at all the digital blueprint that we've been looking at. You have a real cross-country trip. It is documented, hook, line, and sinker. Here's where we are. This is what we're doing. This is what's happening. And then that goes cold. So they'll look at that digital blueprint. That'll include text messages, any emails, any other information, and that will really get investigators to the point of really determining whether he was responsible, he being Mr. Laundrie, for her death.
So, Joey, I'm curious, and I think our DBL Nation is as well. Now that we know this is a homicide, why hasn't Brian been charged with a crime?
So, he could very well have been, right? And I say that, and all of you saying, well, wait a second, we haven't heard about anything about criminality as to him. He hasn't been named a suspect. He's not a defendant in the case. I would suspect and anticipate that investigators, in conjunction with prosecutors, have delineated what specific charges they think are appropriate and viable here. I would also suspect that if they've done that, it's possible that there are charges pending, but that they're what we call, as lawyers, under seal. That means that they're not for you, I, or anyone else to know. It's for investigators to know. Remember this also. When we talk about charges, people could say, well, we don't know if he did it. We have no direct evidence. We're not sure. You don't need any of that. What you need is two things: reason to believe a crime was committed, number one, and number two, reason to believe that Mr. Laundrie committed it. That's what we call probable cause. You don't have to wait to arrest someone until you've determined to a scientific certainty it was them. You need probable cause to arrest Once you do that, you continue to build your case so that you as a prosecutor can make an assessment and determination as to whether you can prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. I think if they find him, we're going to see charges virtually immediately.
So, Joey, there's a big difference between arresting someone and arguing he did it. So what do you think of the evidence in this case, and is it enough for a conviction?
So great question. And obviously, listen, I'm a defense attorney, and so I believe in the presumption of innocence. I believe everybody should have their day in court. I believe everyone is entitled to the most vigorous defense, right? We have people in jail who shouldn't be in jail. That's a travesty. Having said that, there's so much circumstantial evidence here. Oftentimes, crimes are not committed in the light of day. They're not committed in major cities during the light of day where you have surveillance and you have 10 eyewitnesses. So what does that mean? It means you have to piece them together. That means that unlike those cases where you have direct evidence indicating, yes, I saw her do it, I saw him do it, I saw A, B, C, and D. In many instances, you don't have that. Prosecutors have to piece together circumstantial evidence. Brief moment of pause. What does that mean? Well, if I came in here before I had the pleasure of speaking with all of you, and it was really sunny outside, but then when I left to get some lunch or coffee after this conversation, it was wet everywhere. Cars were wet, but it wasn't raining. What could I reasonably presume? I could presume it rained while we were having this discussion. Circumstantial evidence is powerful, and they have that here. Like what? You went on a cross-country trip. You did that in June. You documented everywhere you went, all the places, who the people you were with, what food you were eating, what exactly you were doing. You were keeping in touch with your family, and then you weren't doing it. And guess what happens after that? After that, you go home, Mr. Laundrie, and Miss Petito is missing. And then there's a determination that not only is she missing, but she's dead. And you're a guy who is in the wind. So let me ask you the question. Why would you run if you had nothing to do with it? We call that consciousness of guilt. Now, to be clear, there's an autopsy that has to be performed. There's a lot of evidence that needs to be gathered. You know, he's entitled to his day in court. He'll be vigorously defended. But that circumstantial evidence, buttoning this all up, looks an awful lot like rain to me. And as a result of that, that's what you prove in a court of law as to guilt. Final point. We don't have all the evidence and information here by far. We don't have evidence that exonerates him, meaning tends to show that he's innocent. We don't have all the evidence that tends to show that he's guilty. But from what I see, you certainly have the probable cause. We'll see what happens in a court of law if we get that far, provided that he's safe and okay and didn't do something harmful to himself if or when they find him.
All right, Joey, I want to talk about Brian's parents, because if he came back and confessed anything, do they have an obligation to say something, or are they protected in any way because he's their son?
So, you know, great question. So what it comes down to is this. We know, all of us, that you have something called a spousal privilege. And what that means is that, you know, pillow talk is protected. In the event, for example, you told your spouse anything, either party, husband tells wife, wife tells husband, that's protected. It cannot see the light of day again. No one has to know about it. And it cannot be admitted in a court of law, right? Unless there's some exception or waiver and say, I want to testify, says one spouse, but it's protected. That does not extend to parents. It does not extend to children. So there is no privilege. What does that mean? It however, that parents have to be cooperative. It doesn't mean that we could expect or have them come forward and say, my son told me this and he told me that. But what it does mean, right, is in the event investigators investigate, and let's say, for example, the parents lie. Let's say, for example, they make misrepresentations. Let's say, for example, they were told information and they spoke and they weren't forthcoming about it. That's what we call hindering prosecution. That's what we call obstruction of justice. That's what we call a crime. Buttoning this up. You don't have any obligation, if you're the parents, to go singing like a canary about your child. But in the event you say something and it is false or misleading, now that becomes problematic, and now you get yourself embroiled in criminal activity, which is why all of us defense attorneys say, do not say a word. But I guarantee you they'll be subpoenaed and they'll be asked an awful lot of questions moving forward.
Wow. Joey Jackson, thank you. You are a wealth of information. Thank you for your clarity. We appreciate you joining us here in DVL. Thank you, Joey.
Thanks, Joey.
Great to be with all of you. Have a great day.
You
God
too.
bless.